Hello guys, and welcome back to another video, man. In today's video, we're going to be discussing one of the greatest games to ever exist, Mafia 1. Specifically, Mafia 1's Definitive Edition. Now, the reason why we are talking about the Definitive Edition specifically is because it is the only Mafia 1 version that I have played. I know to all people that have played the original, that may sound crazy, but I hate to break it to y'all, I've only played the Definitive Edition. But just because I only played the Definitive Edition, that doesn't mean that I did not know the story. So let me just get that straight. But anyway, we're going to be talking about Mafia 1. I'm just going to be giving my own thoughts and critiques as usual about the game. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Mafia 1 takes place in the 1930s and the 1940s, which is years before the events of Mafia 2. By the way, if you haven't watched my Mafia 2 video, you should go check that out. But anyway, the story is about a man named Tommy Angelo, or I should say the infamous Tommy Angelo. The story revolves around Tommy, who went from being a cab driver, barely making minimum wage, and barely being able to make ends meet, to a ruthless soldier for the Salieri family. But of course, he didn't really want that life for himself at first, and was very hesitant to join the life of crime. It took him almost getting killed by some of Morello's goons, a rival family of the Salieri family, to make him consider joining the Salieri family and indulging in a life of crime. But of course, with these type of stories, there is never a good ending, as usual. And unfortunately for Tommy, it ended tragically with him being killed in the end by none other than our boy, Vito Scaletta, who was actually the main protagonist of Mafia 2. Now, the reason Tommy was killed in the end was because after he killed Sam and ratted out the entire family, Salieri was put behind bars. But just because he was put behind bars didn't mean that he didn't have any power. And unfortunately for Tommy, he found that out the hard way. Eventually, Eddie Scarpa from the Falcone family got wind of this news and decided to have Vito and Joe handle this task. And that is where we are introduced to the moment where Tommy is ultimately killed by Vito Scaletta and Joe Barbaro. Now, the scenes between the two, where in Mafia 1, Tommy is not surprised at all that Vito and Joe are there to kill him, and he actually smiles when he faces them and happily accepts his fate. Whereas in Mafia 2, he is shocked and surprised that Vito and Joe are there to kill him, which, me personally, I didn't like that scene in Mafia 2. I actually like Mafia 1's version of Tommy getting killed just because it just seemed more realistic. Whereas in Mafia 2, it just seemed like he didn't even know why they were there to kill him. You know, like, come on now. Like, Tommy knew that his sins were going to catch up to him eventually. Of all the crazy things that Tommy has been through, why now would he be surprised that two men are there to kill him? Especially after everything that he's done, he shouldn't be surprised. That's the last thing he should be. So yeah, I just didn't really like that scene in Mafia 2. But other than that, I loved Mafia 2. Now, my whole take on this game is that it's not a masterpiece. I wouldn't even say I would say it's close to a masterpiece, but it's definitely not a masterpiece. But I still think the game is great. Everything from the amazing graphics to the combat system, which I personally think is better than Mafia 2's combat system. Now, obviously, Mafia 1 had a better advantage due to the fact that it's a remake and not a remastered version like Mafia 2's Definitive Edition. The difference between a remake and a remastered is that a remake is when the game is being changed completely from scratch, whereas a remastered is basically just doing some touch-ups on certain mechanics and graphics without actually changing the game at all. I honestly wish Mafia 2 had got a remake with today's graphics. That would have been fire. That would have been fire. You feel me? To me, because like I said, Mafia 2 is my favorite out of the entire Mafia series. Now, if you're someone who hasn't played any of the Mafia games, I would highly recommend playing Mafia 1 to start off, since obviously because it takes place before the events of Mafia 2 and so on. So you want to start at the beginning so you can know how everything connects. And like I said in my Mafia 2 video, the one thing that I really like about the Mafia series is that all the Mafia games are connected in a way. There are many characters that are referenced in Mafia 2 that are from Mafia 1 and vice versa. So everything is connected in a way. You know, whether it's in a big way or a small way, everything is connected. And that's what I like about the Mafia series. Now, one of the things that I liked about Mafia 1 that really stood out to me was the relationship between Tommy and Paulie. Now, similar to Vito and Joe's relationship from Mafia 2, Tommy and Paulie had a much similar relationship as well when it comes to Tommy being the level-headed guy, where Paulie is the wild, rambunctious, basically a loose cannon type of person that Tommy had to keep in check from time to time. Now, I do have a lot of scenes also that I liked from a storytelling perspective in this game as well. The first scene was when Tommy and Paulie were on the train going home talking about a bank robbery that Paulie was planning on doing. The reason why he was planning on doing this was because he was essentially getting tired of doing these petty jobs for the Salieri family and basically not getting anything substantial in return. He basically just wanted to be his own boss, and he was getting tired of being in Salieri's shadow, basically, which is understandable. And this scene really stood out to me because when he was pouring out to Tommy, telling him that, you know, he's cracking 40, he's basically alone, he doesn't have a wife to go home to like Tommy does, he's just all alone. And that scene made me really sad because Paulie is not necessarily a bad guy. Now, of course, he's done a lot of bad things and he shouldn't be excused for that. I think what we all have to understand is that none of these guys are good people. They're all bad people. They've all done bad things. They've all committed crimes. There's nothing good about any of these people. But it's not like these people were born evil. They're not inherently bad people. They just got caught up in the life of crime and thought that it was their only way of being successful in life. These are usually people who were outcasts in society, and basically society didn't give a shit about people like them, right? So the Mafia was a way for them to feel included, you know, to feel respected in a sense. You know, Tommy's case in particular, he was a cab driver, wasn't really making a lot of money, and because of that, he was looked down upon, didn't really get any respect from a lot of people because he's working a very low paying minimum wage job, barely able to, you know, pay for his bills. And so when he joined the Salieri family and started making some real money, that's when he felt like, okay, this is what I'm actually good at and there's no turning back now. At least this is how Tommy thought. He thought that there is no turning back at this point. I've done too much to turn back at this point. So serving the Salieri family for years, he just kept doing petty crimes over and over and over again. Now the situation with Paulie is, I could assume that Paulie's situation is very similar. The only difference is that Paulie doesn't have a wife to look after or to care for like Tommy does, right? Like I said before, Paulie's all alone. He doesn't have a woman to go home to. So unfortunately, Paulie's way of getting out of the game, I guess you can say, is to rob this bank, earn as much money as he can, and potentially open up a business and, you know, just start his own path. But unfortunately for Paulie, I knew that it was not going to be that easy, and I knew this bank robbery idea that he had wasn't going to end well. And the reason why I knew this was because it's Mafia, and usually with these type of stories, it doesn't have a good ending. And I was right, as always, because what ends up happening is that Salieri, of course, ends up finding out what Paulie and Tommy did, and that's why he has Sam kill Paulie. And then not only that, but Sam takes all the money that Paulie and Tommy got from the bank robbery and gives it to Salieri, right? So because of that, that gives Sam more of a reason to betray Tommy when Tommy asks him, can he get some money so that him and Sarah can escape or, you know, get away from Salieri for a little while, you know? Now, of course, this was very unrealistic. and it just wasn't going to be able to be achievable at this point because Salieri already knew that Tommy had betrayed him. So because of that, eventually he was going to have Tommy killed, just like how he had Paulie killed. Tommy knew this, so that's why he needed to get far away as soon as possible. But Sam also knew that Tommy was going to plan on doing this, but he was ordered by Salieri to kill Tommy before he escaped. Now, the story of Mafia is not that complicated to understand. It's very simple. And I think I'd say the overall message of the Mafia series is to basically tell all of us viewers and people who played the game that there's only two outcomes when you live this kind of lifestyle. You either end up dead or you end up in prison. There's no third option. There's no third outcome. It's just you either end up dead or you end up in prison. It's either one or the other, you know. And for most of them, especially in the Mafia, you're either gonna end up dead, you know. And if you get lucky, you don't die, but you end up in prison instead. So that was basically one of my favorite scenes of the game. I would easily put it top 3 favorite scenes of the game in my personal opinion, just because of how much emotion the scene had, you know. Like, you can really feel the trembling in Paulie's voice as he's telling Tommy, like, hey, I need to do this. I need to go rob this bank. I need to get this money so I can get out of Salieri's grasp. I'm tired of doing work for Salieri. I just want to be my own boss. I want to be me. I want to do what I want to do. You know, because at the end of the day, that's what Paulie wanted. That's all he wanted at the end of the day. He just wanted to be his own man. He wanted to be his own boss. Salieri couldn't even let him do that, and he had him killed. And I knew that was going to happen because that's what happens when you live this kind of lifestyle, you know? It's like once you're in it, there's no escaping it. And unfortunately, everybody that ends up in that lifestyle, it's only inevitable that they will ultimately fail in the end, because that's what comes with being in the Mafia. Now, the second scene that I liked in this game was when Tommy met his demise in the face of Vito Scaletta and Joe Barbaro right at the end of the game. So as he's watering his plants in front of his house, Vito and Joe pull up to him, right? As they're walking towards him, Vito asks him, Mr. Angelo? He says his name. Obviously, they know that's him, but they just want to confirm. Now, he doesn't say anything at first. He just stops watering his plants because he already knows that this is the end for him, you know? And I really liked how the definitive edition did this scene because it really shows that Tommy knew that his time was going to come eventually. He knew that Salieri was going to get him in the end. He knew it. He knew that he would never be able to escape Salieri's grasp. No matter how hard he tried to run away, Salieri was going to get him eventually. Even if he did put Salieri behind bars and had him locked up in a prison cell, that didn't mean that Salieri didn't have any power. Even while being behind bars, Salieri still had enough power to go after Tommy and still have him killed, just like what he did with Frank, you know? The scene where Tommy is about to kill Sam, and he asks Sam, well, what happened to Frank? And Sam tells him that a friend of the family's saw Frank betting at the dog trap. And we all know what happens. Frank ends up getting whacked, and we can safely assume that his family was also killed as well. So that was sad, but you know, like I said, that's what comes with living this kind of lifestyle. So anyway, Tommy turns around, he faces Vito and Joe, and instead of being scared and shook and just begging for mercy, he actually does the opposite. He looks both of them in the face and he says yes. And he actually does it with a smile on his face. You can't really tell at first glance, but if you really look closely at his face when he's facing them, he actually has a little smirk on his face because he knows that this is the end for him, but most importantly, he knows that his family will be safe even if he is killed. That is why when after they shot him and as he's dying and bleeding out, he's telling Sarah, his wife, and his kids, his grandkids, he's telling all of them like, hey, at least you're safe, okay? Don't worry about me. You are safe. Remember that. You're safe, you know? And at the end of the day, that's all that really mattered to Tommy, was the fact that his family was safe and that everyone was going to live out a normal life, a better life than he ever did. And at the end of the day, that's all that Tommy wanted. So those two scenes really did it for me when it came to Mafia 1. And those were the scenes that made me fall in love with Mafia and just the whole series as a whole. Now, of course, like I said before, Mafia 2 is my favorite Mafia out of the three, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like Mafia 1. Mafia 1, like I said before, is a very close second. It's not a masterpiece, but it is a very close second. And I would highly recommend anyone who has not played the Mafia games to play Mafia 1 so that you can get immersed into the story and really see these masterpieces of the game for what they are, you know? Now, even though the storytelling and the graphics of these games are very amazing, they're not perfect in no way. Now, the gameplay is not exactly the best. It's not the best. That's just me being honest. I'm not saying it's trash, but it's simply just not the best, obviously. Which is what you can expect from a third-person shooters game where all you're doing is just shooting at people every mission and just running and killing people. That's all you're doing. You can't really expect the gameplay to be, you know, top tier when you're kind of just doing the same missions over and over again. But hey, that's just my take on it. You know, some people might look at it differently. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the game is trash or that you shouldn't play the game or shouldn't buy the game just because the gameplay is not God tier. You know, the gameplay may not be God tier, but it's still a good game at the end of the day. And me personally, I still think it's worth buying the game. Now, these games are incredibly old, but just because they're old, that doesn't mean you shouldn't play them. They have great storytelling. The atmosphere of the games are very immersive. You know, just seeing how these characters interacted and lived during these times, you know, the 1930s, the 1940s, you know, during the Great Depression. You know, these were some of the most difficult and horrific times to live in during human history. And seeing these people just interact with each other during these times and still find a way to just keep going and living, no matter how much they're struggling, it really just, it inspired me. And it inspired me in my own life because, you know, you will hear a lot of young people complain that, you know, the times we live in today are bad. But I always tell myself, like, these times that we're going through right now is nothing compared to what the people went through back in the 30s and the 40s. You know, when racism was at an all-time high. You had the Great Depression going on. You had World War II. You know, the Cold War. You know, everything was just making society collapse as a whole. So, you know, I'm forever grateful. In my personal opinion, I'm just forever grateful. But anyway, like I was saying, this game overall is amazing. I love Mafia 1, especially the remake. Like I said before, I never played the original Mafia 1. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. I played a little bit of the original, but I never actually finished it. And then when I decided to actually finish the first Mafia game, it wasn't until I got the definitive edition where I was like, okay, now I actually want to play this game and actually finish it. And when I played Mafia 1, that's when I became instantly hooked into the Mafia series. Then I was like, oh shit, this game is fire, right? And then I found out there was a Mafia 2. So I told myself, well, I already played Mafia 1, so I'm going to play Mafia 2 and beat the whole game of that. And that's what I did. I beat Mafia 2, had a great gaming experience. Like I said, the gameplay wasn't exactly the best, but I still had fun playing the game. You know, the characters, the comedic duo between Vito and Joe made me play the game and become more immersed into the game even more because of how funny the characters were. The comedic jokes that they always had in the most intense situations just made me laugh and it just made me enjoy the game that much more, you know? Mafia 1 did have its funny moments, you know, but I think the one thing that Mafia 1 lacked in was the comedic humor that Mafia 2 had. You know, not to say that Mafia 1 didn't have any funny moments in it, but for the most part, it was really serious and really dark for the most part. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you know, there were just some moments where it's kind of funny, but not really. But you know, it just didn't have that same comedic value that Mafia 2 had. You know, with Joe and Vito and Eddie and you know all these funny characters. Marty, you know, rest in peace to him. You know, he had a tragic end in the game. You know, if y'all interested in me making videos about certain characters in the Mafia series, I would definitely be open to that. So if you're interested in that, make sure you comment that down below, and I'll definitely make videos on certain characters in the Mafia series. But I would say for the Mafia series as a whole, right, is that even though it is one of my favorite games, it's definitely not my favorite out of the series. You know, like I said before, Mafia 2 is my favorite, and it will always be my favorite. Mafia 1 at this point, well, at least the definitive edition, was done right. It was done great. The fact that they actually built this game, well, not built, but the fact that they actually remade this game from scratch, they completely changed everything about the game. Now, of course, the story, for the most part, still stayed the same, but they changed the game from the ground up. They completely remade the game. The graphics are off the charts. It's nothing like the original. It's completely different. Newly enhanced graphics from today's age, right? The story was changed a little bit, but for the most part, it was almost 100% completely the same. The reason why I say it changed a little bit, because there are certain scenes that look different from the original. For example, in the end, where Tommy is telling his story about what happened after the whole situation with him ratting out the Salieri family, and as he's older at his daughter's wedding, right? There is a scene where he's talking about how he spent a lot of time in prison, right? Even though he was under witness protection, he still had to serve time for the crimes that he did, right? Of course, he served less time than his other, you know, companions that, well, former companions that he was in during the family. He still had to serve time regardless. You know, I mean, for crying out loud, he committed a lot of crimes. You know, he's really no different from the rest of them, you know. But unlike the rest of them, he had a lot to lose. He had a family. The rest of them didn't have a family, you know. So he had more to lose than the rest of them. So he figured, well, this is my only way out of this. And that's where he chose to snitch on the entire family, and that's what he did. Now, unfortunately, it didn't end well for him, because he ended up getting killed in the end. But anyway, where Tommy's in prison and he's writing in his little journal or whatever. In the original, he had a suit on in that cell, but in the definitive edition, he had a prison jumpsuit on, right? So there are some things that they changed in the game, but for the most part, it's pretty much all the same, right? Now, the voice actors and the characters obviously were changed. You know, the original, the voices were a little different. Not a little, they were a lot different than the definitive edition characters and voices. But to me, stuff like that doesn't really matter. As long as the voice acting is good, and as long as the characters match to the original as closely as possible, that's really all that matters at the end of the day. At least to me, that's really all that matters. So for the most part, the game was good. Now, I'm gonna just end the video off on this point, and that is, if you're someone who's really into immersive games like myself, then I would recommend getting Mafia 1, the definitive edition. Now, if you want to see how the game is before the definitive edition, like if you want to play the original, then you could definitely play the original, right? And then you could play the definitive edition to compare the two to see how they're different, you know? But either way, it's the same story, same characters, right? So yeah, get the game, play the game. I would really suggest it. It's fantastic. And to be honest, it's one of the best games I ever played in my entire life. If I really had to be honest with you. That whole scene where Tommy is talking to Sam and Sam is just bleeding out, and Tommy's just staring him down, and Sam is just talking, trying to buy time. It was sad, but it was satisfying at the same time, because I just wanted Tommy to just kill Sam so bad, and he of course he did. He ended up killing him, and you can tell that Tommy was really close to Paulie. I feel like Tommy was closer to Paulie than he was to Sam. Now, he still cared about Sam, but him and Paulie were closer, obviously. Sam was just kind of like that third friend that just was there in the mix, but Tommy wasn't as close to him as he was to Paulie. That's why when he found out that Sam killed Paulie, Tommy in a sense was enraged, because he actually deeply cared about Paulie. He did. He wanted the best for him. And the fact that Sam could just do that and betray them, it enraged him, as it should, and that's why it felt so satisfying when he killed Sam in the end to avenge his fallen friend Paulie. It just felt good just to hear him, shoot those gunshots into him. It really did. But yeah, this game definitely has a lot of memorable moments, and the definitive edition really did good job, like for real. But anyway, that's all I really have to say for the video, man. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said before, Mafia 1, definitely a GOAT. You should definitely get the game. It's a must get. I know the game is old, but like I said, if you're someone who's looking for an immersive gaming experience, then I would suggest get Mafia 1. It's a must get, right? And then playing Mafia 1 will help you understand Mafia 2 a little bit better when it comes to certain scenes, right? But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And that is all from a gaming's perspective.